There's a particular moment that keeps repeating. You're listening, the room is moving forward, and something inside you slows down. Not because you're lost, because you're already somewhere else. You notice patterns before they're named. You hear what's missing as clearly as what's said. And there's a hesitation that forms, not from fear of speaking, but from knowing that once you do, the temperature will change. So you stay quiet a little longer than necessary, not to disappear, just to avoid disrupting the surface. That quiet isn't emptiness, it's restraint. Over time, it starts to feel like a private misalignment. You're present, engaged, outwardly functional, yet there's a growing sense that your inner tempo doesn't match the room's pace. Conversations resolve too quickly. Certainties arrive too easily. The relief people feel at simple answers is something you notice before you question it. And when you do speak, carefully, neutrally, the response is often not disagreement. It's something subtler. A pause that doesn't invite continuation, a glance that suggests you've gone a step too far. You learn, gradually, that recognition doesn't always come in the form of rejection. Sometimes it comes as indifference, sometimes as polite redirection, sometimes as humor that gently flattens what you meant. This doesn't feel dramatic, it feels quiet. And because it's quiet, it's easy to doubt your own reading of it. There's an unspoken assumption that if something mattered, it would announce itself loudly. But some forms of friction don't make noise. They register internally as a slight pressure, the sense that your way of seeing isn't wrong, but it isn't welcome either. At first, this can feel like a social failure, then like a communication problem. Eventually, it starts to feel structural. Not everyone experiences ideas as neutral objects. For some people, ideas are extensions of identity, proof of competence, belonging, or safety. When an idea introduces uncertainty, it doesn't arrive as information, it arrives as destabilization. You might notice this before you can articulate it, the way complexity drains energy from a conversation rather than enriching it. The way nuance is tolerated briefly, then quietly abandoned. The way certainty, even when thin, restores comfort. None of this is malicious, it's protective. Understanding that doesn't make the experience easier. In fact, it complicates it. Because once you recognize that insight itself can create distance, you're left holding a new kind of tension, the awareness that clarity doesn't always connect, and sometimes it separates. This is where many people misinterpret what's happening. They assume the distance means arrogance or emotional coldness or a lack of social interest. But often the opposite is true. There's a sensitivity at work, an attunement to what a moment can hold and what it can't. Holding back isn't about superiority. It's about timing, about sensing when an idea will land as an invitation and when it will land as a disruption. The difficulty is that this sensitivity rarely receives feedback, so it can start to feel like a private burden, seeing more than is usable, understanding more than can be shared. Insight, when it arrives early, doesn't feel like an advantage. It feels unfinished. There's nowhere obvious to place it. Over time, this can create a subtle fatigue, not from thinking too much, but from constantly modulating what you allow to surface, from translating your internal complexity into something socially acceptable, from deciding again and again which parts of your perception are worth the friction they might cause. This isn't loneliness in the dramatic sense, it's a quieter form of separation. You're not cut off from people, you're just not fully met. And here's where the tension deepens. The same awareness that allows you to see beneath the surface also prevents you from fully believing in the surface. You notice how much of everyday interaction is built on gentle simplifications, agreeable narratives, emotional shortcuts, shared illusions that make proximity easier. Seeing this doesn't make you cynical, it makes you careful. Because once you see how much social cohesion depends on not looking too closely, you understand why depth is sometimes treated as excess, why questioning feels heavier than agreeing, why complexity can feel like a disturbance rather than a contribution. This isn't a flaw in individuals, it's a feature of groups. Groups tend to organize around stability, and stability often relies on shared assumptions remaining unexamined. When an idea quietly challenges those assumptions, it doesn't announce itself as a threat. It simply creates discomfort, a sense that something once solid is now less certain, and discomfort, even mild, is rarely welcomed in casual spaces. So the response isn't debate, it's avoidance, topic changes, jokes, a subtle return to what feels safe. If you're attuned, you notice this immediately. If you're not, it just feels like conversation. This is why insight can feel isolating without ever being opposed, why being perceptive doesn't guarantee being understood, why the ability to see beneath appearances often comes with the cost of realizing how necessary those appearances are for others. There's no clean resolution here, only a deeper awareness of trade-offs. To understand more is to carry more context. To carry more context is to hesitate before simplifying. And to hesitate is to move out of sync with environments that reward immediacy and confidence over reflection. This doesn't mean insight is rejected because it's wrong. Often, it's resisted because it arrives before there's room for it. And that creates a particular kind of internal conflict. You value truth, but you also value connection. You sense complexity, but you live among systems that prefer ease, so you learn to hold multiple realities at once: what you see, what can be said, what will be heard. That balancing act doesn't announce itself, but it shapes you. It sharpens your observation, it deepens your inner life, and it quietly alters how you move through the world, not as someone detached, but as someone aware of how fragile shared certainty can be. If this feels familiar, it's not because you're broken or misplaced. It's because perception has consequences. And one of those consequences is realizing that understanding isn't always rewarded with closeness. Sometimes it simply changes what closeness means. The tension doesn't disappear with that realization. It becomes more precise. You stop expecting recognition everywhere, not out of resignation, but accuracy. And in that accuracy, there's a different kind of steadiness, not loud, not affirming, just a quiet alignment with what is actually happening beneath the surface. That alignment doesn't solve the distance, but it explains it. And sometimes explanation is enough to let the experience settle, not into comfort, but into clarity.